Welcome to First Chapter Friday. I'm Jacquei, and I am reading The Afterwards by A.F. Harold, and it's illustrated by Emily Gravitt. It's about a girl whose best friend suddenly passes away, and she finds herself in the afterward, which is where the recently deceased reside, and she's intent on getting her best friend back to back home with her, so that way they everything go back to normal. So here is The Afterward by A.F. Harold. Prologue. An old woman returns to a town she once knew. It is a bright day, a summer's day. From the train station, she gets a taxi to an ordinary street. Stops outside a shop that was once a bakery. Gets out, looks in the window at the absence of donuts. It takes time to walk from there to the mouth of the alley. Much longer than it used to take, but then everything takes longer now. Walking, making tea, getting out of bed. The sound of children playing echoes in the blue sky from a field somewhere, or a playground. She unfolds a sheet of paper from her coat pocket. It had been forgotten for such a long time, but recently, after Mo died, and after talking to the doctor, it had risen to the top of her desk drawer. It had found its way to her hand. She steps forward, the paper cold in the warm sunlight. It is time, she thinks. It's been long enough now. She walks by herself into the alley. She is looking forward to seeing the cat one more time. She wants to say thank you at last. Chapter 1. December ran up the stairs 2 at a time, tripping at the top and knocking a pile of paperbacks over as she caught herself. She spun on the landing, ignoring the books, and hurtled into her bedroom. Her hair was wet and dripping, and she plunged her head into a towel that had been warming on the radiator. "Ah," she said. Luxury. She'd been looking forward to this for ages, thinking about it the whole journey home. It had obviously been about to rain, but her dad had insisted they go for a walk in the woods anyway. It was what families did on a Sunday afternoon. And they were a family, after all. "It's a beautiful day," he'd said. "I wouldn't be surprised if the bluebells are out. This is just the weekend for it." The bluebells had been out, whole rippling beds of them underneath the trees, but so had the clouds, and they'd gotten absolutely soaked. It had been a long walk back to the car without an umbrella. She hadn't spoken to him on the way home. "Shoes!" he shouted from downstairs. The front door banged shut. She sat on her bed and looked at her shoes. She'd scraped the worst of the mud off before they got in the car, of course, but they still weren't exactly what you'd call clean, and they certainly weren't dry by any stretch of the imagination. There were dark footprints leading across the carpet straight to her. Well, it was his fault, she reckoned, not feeling very guilty at all. If he'd had a warm, clean towel in the car, she wouldn't have needed to hurry upstairs to dry her hair. So she wasn't to blame. Not really. She bent down and tugged at the laces. They didn't budge. "Knots!" she shouted. "Ember," her dad said from the doorway. "There's no need to shout. I'm right here." He was holding the books in his hand. He set them down in the corner of the chest of drawers. He smiled at her. "Look at this carpet," he said, shaking his head. "You don't have to take after your mom. Just like her." He knelt down and lifted one of her feet. "Knots, you say?" December nodded. His fingers prized at the laces for a few seconds, and then he said, "There you go." She wriggled out of the shoe and lifted the other one for him to untie too. "What do you say?" he asked. "What's for tea, Harry?" she replied, deadpan. He stood up and poked her on the nose. "Bangers and mash," he said. She watched as he picked his books up, the wet shoes dangling by their laces from the same hand, and went out onto the landing, pulling her door shut behind him. The what's for tea business was an old routine, and they both liked it. It was easier than saying thank you and meant more or less the same thing. You just had to remember not to do it when you were standing in front of the headmaster's desk. His name was Harry, and that was what she'd always called him, ever since she was little, and it was hard to stay mad at him for long. It was something about his smile, the width of it, the easiness of it, the quickness of it, the warmth of it. It was like a big, wobbly hot water bottle looking at you. December had known him ever since she was a baby. He was her dad, after all, and for as long as she could remember, it had just been him and her. Her mom had gone away, and they'd been left on their own, her and Harry and her. And it was all right. That's what she thought. She knew it was all right because of that smile of his. Her best friend from school, Happiness, had a dad and a mom, and they were always shouting at one another, even when December went and stayed over. She'd snuggle in her sleeping bag on Happiness's floor and listen to the noise downstairs. It was a strange way to go to sleep. Harry never shouted at her mom. Her mom never shouted at Harry. Harry never had a bad word to say about her mom. He didn't say much about her, but when he did, he smiled and looked at December and shook his head in a way that smelled of love. She knew she was lucky. She felt lucky. Having a dead mom meant that the teachers at school tried to be extra nice to her, even that time when she tripped up Emerald Jones in the playground accidentally on purpose, and her tooth had come out. She got what they called the benefit of the doubt. After all in all, life being December wasn't so bad. So that was the first chapter of the Afterwards by A.F. Harold, and I hope you like it and come check it out and see what happens next.